Hello, my name is William, the Avid reader, and today I'm reviewing Who Rules the World, written by Noam Chomsky in 2016. This is a relatively recent book, and its basic premise would be that the United States is the true terroristic nation and aggressor nation and things like that. So he basically a simple way of summarizing what he views as the axis of evil himself. He doesn't say this exactly, but he claims that you've got number one is the United States and Israel, and then you've got Saudi Arabia, and then a bit lower is UK, and then France. And he claims that these are terrorist states. So yeah, and he also. And to keep in mind, Noam Chomsky is an anarcho-syndicalist socialist, so very similar to Marxist, you could say. And I would say this book is not very nuanced. It's a bit one-sided with the United States and Israel being at fault for everything. For example, Hamas in Palestine, that's Israel's fault, of course. The Shias militias funded by Iran, they exist because of Israeli-American involvement in the Middle East. He claims tacitly that the United States is an oligarchy or a corporatocracy, and he equates this with a fascist state, which. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. And he believes that the two biggest dangers to humanity is climate change, and the second one is nuclear weapons, which he believes that we entered into a new era after since 1945 when the United States bombed Japan, and he believes that the Cuban Missile Crisis was the fault of the United States, and that a lot of close calls about nuclear war about the nuclear winter as the United States' fault. He believes kind of that the Soviet Union was justified to put nuclear weapons in Cuba, and he believes that the Soviet Union were willing to compromise a bit. Even Stalin, he says that in the early 1950s that there was a willingness to unify Germany as a neutral country, non-aligned, neither communist or under the sphere of influence of the United States, and wouldn't be part of NATO, but would be democratic. He believes that the Palestinians, of course, they can do no wrong, really. And the United States commits crimes of aggression, so he believes that the United States is the initiator of plenty of wars, like for example in Afghanistan, because he says that the Taliban were possibly willing to have Bin Laden in a court of law, but the United States said no, we are invading. And he believed that Iraq was based on false premises, and he points out that Iraq used to be a US ally, and that the United States was outraged when Turkey followed the will of the people by not joining in the war against Iraq. Before World War II, the United States was quite isolationist, but with Roosevelt coming in, and especially since Eisenhower, the United States has been has had a very aggressive foreign policy, and assumed that this has a sphere of influence on the Western Hemisphere and Europe and North Africa and the Middle East and the Far East. He believes it's aggression and terrorism, that there have been coups performed by the United States since 1950s, many. One of the first is the coup of democratic Iran, because the United States performed a lot of coups d'etats and put in military dictatorships in secular democratic nations in the Middle East, and supported Islamic fundamentalism there because it was anti secular nationalism. And he also supported the coups in Latin America. And keep in mind, he believes that all presidents have been basically like this. So Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Reagan, Obama, Bush, all American presidents since Eisenhower have been involved in this. Yeah, I don't know about Trump, because the book stops in 2016, so who knows about Trump to it? Until Obama, at least. And he says that the first 9/11 was in 1973, when he claims that the Chilean military overthrew the democratic elected socialist democracy in Chile and of Salvador Allende. What he won't tell you is that Chile was at the point of turning into a communist regime, very friendly to Castro. Speaking of Castro, he believes that Cuba was an American colony until Castro took reins of independence, and that the United States didn't there. But what he doesn't mention about Chile is that Chile was one of the freest dictatorships, and while you had a lot of mass killings in Latin America, they weren't necessarily massacres. So in Chile, for example, it was targeted towards dissidents, so specifically towards socialists and communists. It wasn't like in communist nations where they killed pretty much left and right. So it's true that there's been thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of mass killings, of deaths in different Latin American countries because of military governments that were in American interests. But first of all, they're not really capitalistic, they're monopolistic, with the exception of Chile, which was the successful dictatorship, and Pinochet turned out to be quite popular there later on. And then you look at the communist states, and the communist states were much more genocidal. They killed a lot more people, like in the Soviet Union, China. Worst genocide in history is in Cambodia, a genocide that Chomsky does not acknowledge. He does not acknowledge. He only talks about the mass killings in Latin America, and that Israel does about against the Palestinians, and that Israel is an apartheid state, which is, I would say, debatable. It may be leaning towards yes, apartheid state, but not as extreme as it's said. The communist states kill much more people. So all the Latin American military dictatorships, all military dictatorships that the United States has backed, they've killed at tops a few million, maybe. So I'm going to be nice to Chomsky and say, okay, they maybe killed up to 10 million. Let's say 10 million, even if it's much lower probably. So under 10 million. How many did the communist regimes kill? If you're very generous to socialists, then it's maybe it's only 60 million. If you lean towards a more drastic number, it's 100 million. He's talking about the person who gets shot in the foot and not the person who gets shot in the head multiple times. Claiming that specifically the Chilean coup was the first 9/11. The Chilean coup targeted the government, the socialists, the party surrounding it. It got rid of dissidents. What was 9/11? It killed indiscriminately. So that's an outrageous claim, I would say. And he says that the United States so-called support of democracy is a farce, which is usually true, yes. Because apparently when there were free elections in Palestine and Hamas was democratically elected, the United States was outraged. Now, is that because Hamas is a terrorist organization? That is debatable. And of course he blames the US for a Cold War. He says that the global South and Latin America started rebelling against this American EU imperialism, and Latin America may be a model for how countries should be. Yeah, that's a summary of his book. Now, it's has so many good positive points, but there are also some negative things. So I've got some criticism of him. So his foreign affairs are decent, even though they're one-sided. He doesn't referred to all the Cold War crimes committed by the communists, and he focuses on the Americans in Latin America mostly and the Middle East. It's at least true. It's not that he brings up a part of the truth at least. It gives the impression like that Western Europe was under and Japan was under the control of the United States, without mentioning that it was really democratic. Eastern Europe was not at all democratic. Also, the capitalist countries were a lot wealthier. Western Germany is of course much wealthier than Eastern Germany. South Korea is a lot more wealthier than North Korea. So he talks about the deal that Gorbachev and Bush Sr. made that that Germany could reunify and join NATO, but the United States should not extend to NATO. But that was an informal deal, so Congress might not agree with that. So that he should realize, Gorbachev. And also, Russia has or Soviet Russia have a history of invading people, so it would make sense that Estonia would want to join NATO. And it makes sense that Ukraine and Georgia wanted to join NATO when they're invaded by Russia. Doesn't bring up the communist atrocities and half justifies the Islamic atrocities as that they're because of the United States policy, which is partially true, yes, but it doesn't justify them, and he downplays Iran's danger. This is a unique view, almost Marxist view of the world. So, who rules the world? How would I rate this book? Thought about it. There are many positive points about this book, especially on foreign policy, but there are many negative points, especially the cherry picking. So, how would I rate this? I would rate this 6 out of 10. It's an okay to decent book, and I would still recommend to read it. It's interesting to get a socialist point of view of global politics. It's an interesting book, and you get to learn about a lot of the horrible stuff that American foreign policy and that the Israelis have, and that the Israelis have been involved in. But it's not so nuanced. It's one-sided. Although the United States has done a lot of stuff, you cannot call it an oligarchy, and that does not justify socialism. And he claims that the United States has far right. Both parties are almost ultra right. The right-left wing political spectrum that he presents is bad. And this point of view is not so nuanced. In portraying the right wing, the Republicans, he believes that they're basically the devil, that they're out to destroy the world. Just because they disagree with you does not mean that they want to destroy the world on purpose. They may be wrong, but the worst thing your opposition is usually they're just stupid. They're not evil automatically just because they're opposition. So yeah, I rate this book 6 out of 10. Noam Chomsky, from your socialist point of view, you did a good job of writing, but from a rational point of view, for example, a right-wing libertarian, for me, you did an okay to decent job. So 6 out of 10. So this was the Avid Reader's review of Who Rules the World, written by Noam Chomsky in 2016. I hope you enjoyed this review that was a bit more opinionated than usually. And I will see you guys next time.